Welcome to Storyflix. In this video, we will explain Rebecca. This movie tells the story of a young newlywed who arrives at her husband's imposing family estate on a windswept English coast and finds herself battling the shadow of his first wife, Rebecca, whose legacy lives on in the house long after her death. What is the mystery hidden behind the perfect figure of the ex-wife? Let's find out in Rebecca. Rebecca begins by showing a young woman named Sarah who works as Mrs. Van Hopper on vacation in Monte Carlo. Sarah seemed overwhelmed to take care of all the master's needs when they stayed at a hotel. When going to lunch at the hotel, Mrs. Van Hopper asked her assistant to reserve a seat near a handsome and wealthy English widower named Maxim de Winter who had just lost his wife. Sarah then went to the restaurant and asked one of the waiters to prepare a special seat for her master and Maxim de Winter at one table. However, the waiter said that his guests had the right to sit wherever they wished. Not running out of ideas, she then tried to bribe the waiter by offering him some money. But because she was too nervous, she dropped her wallet and the money flew out. A man then approached her and helped her, saying that she did not need to bribe the restaurant waiter. When the waiter called the man's name, Sarah finally found out that the man who had helped her was Maxim de Winter. Not long after that, Mrs. Van Hopper came to meet Maxim at his desk and they had lunch together. The next day, Mrs. Van Hopper suddenly fell ill and had to rest in bed. As they were about to have breakfast in the restaurant, one of the waitresses stopped Sarah and told her that an assistant couldn't eat in the restaurant without her master's presence. Maxim, who happened to be there, then called her and asked her to sit with him and enjoy breakfast together. The two of them had a long conversation until the day was getting closer and Sarah then said goodbye to Maxim because she had to return to her master immediately. Not long after, when she returned to her room, Sarah received a memo from Maxim inviting her to take a walk in the area around the hotel. Because Mrs. Van Hopper was still sick, she accepted Maxim's invitation. Day after day, Sarah and Maxim de Winter often spent time together until the seeds of love grew between the two of them. But then, Mrs. Van Hopper immediately noticed the closeness of her assistant to Maxim de Winter, which made her very jealous and angry with her assistant. Mrs. Van Hopper then decided to leave Monte Carlo as soon as possible and took her assistant back to New York to separate from Maxim. The next day, Sarah then rushed to Maxim's room and said goodbye to the man because she was going back to New York. But Maxim instead told her to come with him back to England. Sarah then asked the meaning of Maxim's words and thought he would make her an assistant. But Maxim firmly said he would take her to his house as his wife because he intended to marry her and return to England. The two then went to Mrs. Van Hopper to inform their desire to get married soon. In front of Maxim, Mrs. Van Hopper seemed happy and welcomed their wedding plans, but as soon as Maxim left, she then began to say bad things to Sarah. Long story short, Sarah is now married to Maxim de Winter and has the right to bear the name Mrs. de Winter. The newlyweds finally arrived at Manderley, Maxim de Winter's mansion located in England, and were greeted by the servants and the housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers. Maxim then introduces his new wife to his manager, Frank. Mrs. Danvers then invited Sarah to go around Manderley and showed her room after room. Passing a painting of a woman on display at the top of the stairs, Mrs. Danvers told the hostess that the woman in the painting was Maxim's aunt. After walking around the house, Sarah was very impressed with her new home and had no idea that she would become the wife of this magnificent and beautiful house owner. Especially now that she has her own assistant and also several servants who will serve all her needs. As newlyweds who are intoxicated with romance, Maxim and Sarah often hug, make love and dissolve in happiness. One night, Sarah asks about Rebecca, Maxim's deceased ex-wife. But Maxim never wanted to talk about Rebecca. At midnight, Sarah caught her husband sleepwalking. When she was about to wake him up, Mrs. Danvers suddenly appeared and forbade her, then told her to let Maxim stay like that. The next morning, at breakfast, Sarah told her husband that last night he was sleepwalking. But Maxim did not respond to his wife's words and immediately said goodbye because he had an important meeting to attend. After that, Sarah entered a room that turned out to be Rebecca's. Sarah found Rebecca's neatly stored belongings and accidentally dropped a ceramic display and broke it. Panicked, she then hid the ceramic display in a drawer so he wouldn't be caught. That evening, while combing her hair, Sarah realized that the comb she was using belonged to Rebecca because of the initials R on it. One day, when Sarah was walking with her husband and their pet dog. But then, the dog suddenly ran fast, so she chased her to the lighthouse, where she met the lighthouse keeper who said that Rebecca had drowned. When Sarah asked Maxim about the cause of Rebecca's death, her husband was again evasive and didn't want to talk about his ex-wife. Not long after, Maxim's grandmother and his older sister came to visit him and became acquainted with Sarah. While they were engaged in conversation, the senile Maxim's grandmother suddenly became a bit rude to Sarah. Maxim's sister then apologized to her sister-in-law for her grandmother's rude attitude, saying that Rebecca and her grandmother had a very close relationship in the past. Maxim's sister clearly implied that Rebecca was a very charming woman and was liked by everyone, making Sarah feel inferior. After that, Sarah enters the house and is surprised by Maxim, who is scolding a servant for removing the ceramic display in Rebecca's room. Maxim did not even hesitate to threaten to fire the servant. Because she doesn't want other people to blame for her actions, Sarah finally confessed to Maxim that she had accidentally broken the ceramic display in Rebecca's room and hid it in a drawer. After knowing this, Maxim was very angry with his wife and then left her just like that. Sarah instantly felt heartbroken when her husband left her just like that. She thinks that she is trapped in the shadow of Rebecca, who is so adored by everyone, and it is possible that Maxim still loves Rebecca very much and has not been able to forget his late wife. The next day, Sarah asked Frank about Rebecca, and Frank said that Rebecca died in a boating accident. The ship she was on sank, and Rebecca's body was only found 2 months later. When Sarah asked about Rebecca's beauty, Frank frankly said that Rebecca was the most beautiful person he had ever met in his life. Hearing this, Sarah felt inferior and did not feel confident being the new Mrs. de Winter replaces Rebecca. Desperate, she then entered Rebecca's room, where she met Mrs. Danvers, who told her that she would never be able to replace Rebecca as Mrs. de Winter. Mrs. Danvers also said that she would never be able to make Maxim happy because in reality, Maxim still loves Rebecca very much and can't forget this beautiful woman forever. The next day, Sarah met a man named Jack Favell, who turned out to be Rebecca's cousin and was said to have come to the house because of Mrs. Danvers. The friendly Jack then offered to teach Sarah on horseback. After that, Jack asked her not to tell Maxim about his arrival at Manderley today. Sarah then asked Mrs. Danvers why she invited Jack to come to Manderley, even though she clearly knew that Maxim didn't like Jack. But Mrs. Danvers dodged and said she didn't invite Jack to come to Manderley. Long story short, Maxim, who learned of Jack's arrival at Manderley and the fact that his wife had spent time with the man, immediately became furious. Maxim and his wife got into a heated argument, although Sarah tried to defend herself and said that Mrs. Danvers who had invited Jack to Manderley. Not long after that, Sarah confronts Mrs. Danvers for conspiring against her by inviting Favell, demanding her resignation, but Mrs. Danvers insists Favell was lying. In the end, Mrs. Danvers managed to convince Sarah not to fire her and forget about the Jack issue. Maxim then apologized to his wife, and their relationship improved and became more harmonious over time. Not only her relationship with Maxim, but Sarah's relationship with Mrs. Danvers is also getting better. The two begin working amicably together, with Mrs. Danvers assisting Sarah in reviving the Manderley costume ball. Mrs. Danvers then convinced Sarah to dress and look like Maxim's aunt, whose painting is on display at the top of the stairs. Without thinking, Sarah agreed with the idea. On the eve of the party, Sarah dressed up with joy, hoping to impress Maxim and everyone else. But as it turned out, what happened next was not what she expected. When Sarah wears the dress and goes to the party, guests are shocked, and Maxim is furious. Sarah learns that Rebecca wore the dress the previous year. Realizing that Mrs. Danvers had manipulated her and believing that Maxim now regrets their marriage, she flees. Mrs. Danvers reveals her contempt for the new Mrs. de Winter, believing she will replace Rebecca. Mrs. Danvers tries to convince Sarah to jump to her death from the window. However, she is thwarted by a nearby shipwreck brought from the storm. The ship is Rebecca's and her decomposed body is discovered on board. The appearance of the wreck and the discovery of Rebecca's body then reopened the investigation into Rebecca's death. If the corpse they just found was Rebecca's, then whose corpse was Maxim buried at Rebecca's funeral some time ago? Sarah tried to ask her husband about it, but Maxim admitted that he didn't know either. Maxim then confesses to his wife that his marriage to Rebecca was fake and that he always hated Rebecca. Maxim stated that Rebecca was a cruel, selfish, adulterous, and manipulative woman. On the night of her death, Rebecca told Maxim that she was pregnant with another man's child, which she would raise under the pretext of Maxim's child. Rebecca puts the trigger of Maxim's gun against her chest and tells him that the only way to get out of it is to kill him. An angry Maxim then pulled the trigger then threw Rebecca's body by placing her in the boat and drowning her. Despite her husband's confession, Sarah is relieved to learn that Maxim does love her and decides to support him throughout the investigation. The facts revealed that Rebecca's boat was deliberately sunk during the trial and Maxim was named a suspect. In a note he wrote, Jack Favell then tries to blackmail Maxim, claiming that he has evidence that Rebecca did not intend to commit suicide. The next day, Mrs. Danvers testified that Rebecca visited an obstetrician in London shortly before her death and said it had something to do with her pregnancy. Not only that, but Mrs. Danvers also testified that Maxim had bribed Jack for a note from Rebecca. The prosecutor then showed Maxim the check that was given to Jack Favell to bribe him, and Maxim was eventually detained for a while. At Manderley, Mrs. Danvers revealed to Sarah that Rebecca hated all the men in her life. Sarah then fires Danvers and tries to find the obstetrician Rebecca visited in London. With Frank's help, Sarah finally found the doctor's address and rushed to London to see him. At the same time, the investigative team also visited the doctor to look for clues about Rebecca. The doctor who treated Rebecca revealed that Rebecca couldn't get pregnant because she had advanced uterine cancer and would die in a few months. After conducting further investigations, the investigation team concluded that Rebecca committed suicide by sinking her own boat, while Sarah personally concluded that Rebecca wanted Maxim to kill her. Maxim de Winter was eventually acquitted of all charges. When Maxim and his wife returned to Manderley, they found that the house was on fire. A servant revealed that Mrs. Danvers started the fire, then fled. Sarah then ran toward the cliff and found Mrs. Danvers was standing on the edge of a precipice. Sarah begged her not to jump, but Mrs. Danvers cursed Sarah instead, then jumped into the sea and drowned. Awakening from a dream years later, Sarah is with her husband in Cairo as they search for their dream home. She says that out of the wreck of Manderley she had saved the only thing worth saving, love. Through this film, we are shown the enormous influence of Rebecca's figure, even though the woman has died. Rebecca is described as a very beautiful woman and is adored by everyone. But it turns out Rebecca is a cruel and manipulative woman, so she can control the people around her, including Maxim, who never felt happy when he married her. After Rebecca's death, Maxim meets a young woman with a soft heart and warm personality, very different from his ex-wife. He fell in love with her. Through the figure of Sarah, we are shown that the kindness we have and maintain will ultimately bring happiness, even though we have to go through various obstacles and trials. Even though her husband was involved in a murder case, she loves and supports her husband through the trial because she knows that he is just a victim of Rebecca's manipulation. In the end, Maxim and his wife couldn't save their stately home and the luxury items inside. But they managed to save and maintain the only more valuable thing than all these riches, namely true love.